I have to say I wasn't intending on returning to the subject of Castlevania so soon, or really even at all, if people didn't seem interested in watching me talk about it, but the response to the previous videos was far more than I was ever expecting. People older than me, younger than me, and my age just enjoying a celebration of these now retro titles. And it allowed me to cross these games off my bucket list, so it was a win-win. For that reason, the videos I was going to make next have been pushed early next year so we can get 3 more Castlevania videos in the picture before the year's up. I really dug the NES Castlevania trilogy, 3 of the most influential action side-scrollers of the mid to late 80s, and despite not being the best games ever made by today's standards or anything like that, I thought they were all really interesting to play and talk about for the first time in the current year. However, what I've always heard was that whether you love the NES trilogy or not, Super Castlevania 4 for the Super Nintendo is really the bomb.com. Like many a franchise that got its start in the NES, it was their Super Nintendo iteration that really evolved what was thought possible with the series' gameplay and story, and Castlevania was no different. Super Castlevania 4 having a ton more levels and bosses and music and effects and gameplay potential than the previous games could ever dream up. It's always either the favorite or in the running for the favorite when people talk about which of the classic Castlevania games is the best. For that reason, I've always been curious to try it. I've sampled it a few times, but like I said about Castlevania 1, whenever I tried it, I get a few levels in, got my ass utterly decimated, and quickly gave up and returned to whatever else it was I needed to be doing that day. Coming back to it after beating the original trilogy really validates why I like to play franchises in order. I like to experience their evolution and see how they iterate upon ideas. Like when I sampled this game a couple years ago, I didn't know what this enemy did or that these platforms were going to spin if you jumped on them in the first level. But the early game was made significantly easier for me because I've played the original games, so I already have foundational skills to build from when doing stuff in Super Castlevania 4 that's both old and new. But before I even think about it, we need to talk about Wand, who is the sponsor of today's video. If you're a PC gamer in any way, I'm sure I don't need to introduce you to game assists or things of that nature. There are many ways to get them for your PC games, but what makes Wand different is that it's a desktop app, not a website. It's an app you can open while your game is on and use it as a layer on the top of your game that can provide maps and other tools and enhancements in real time, like unlimited health or ammo in a variety of single-player games. Or sliders to precisely adjust the behavior of things in the game, like this example from Silent Hill 2. It's very easy to set up from the link in the description and supports thousands of games, many of which are ones I've spoken about in the show before, such as the Resident Evil games or the Batman Arkham series or Metal Gear Solid or Devil May Cry, and of course, Sonic the Hedgehog. A variety of Sonic games on Steam are supported on Wand, including Shadow Generations, the subject of last week's video, where you can practice your speedrunning skills with the no damage or infinite boost assists. Very practical stuff indeed. To learn more, you can visit my link in the description, which is wand.gg/jaysreviews, and get Wand for free and take your PC gaming to the next level. Thanks again to Wand for sponsoring this video. Now we may get back to your regularly scheduled programming. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, this is still a game from the early 90s, so I once again made sure to read the box and the manual before playing, because apparently, the gravest Castlevania adventure breaks new ground and buries you in it. A century of Transylvanian tranquility is about to come to a shocking end. Once again, mortifying screams of helpless villagers shake the ground as they huddle against new nightmarish horrors unleashed by the Duke of Darkness, Count Dracula. And this time he has a tombstone with your name on it, Simon Belmont. You must descend into Castle of the Undead and its gruesome grounds, accompanied by the most chilling sound effects to ever tingle your spine. And in the manual, we're congratulated on owning another fantastic entry in the acclaimed Castlevania series. The manual is mostly about the new game mechanics, describing how the game works with the tongue firmly in cheek, like when it says, "Get a life, Simon," when describing extra lives. It also feels the need to explain how the reason Simon has extra range with his whip in this game compared to the previous ones is because apparently he found an ancient tome left behind by the ancestors that describes the whip's true secrets. How you can actually crack the whip in multiple directions. Guess Simon's an idiot who needed a tome to tell him that. Maybe the tome was just a copy of Indiana Jones on VHS or something, but the most interesting aspect of the manual and the in-game story components is how it details Dracula returning every 100 years to plunge the world with evil, and how Simon is the latest Belmont to take up the whip and fight the Prince of Darkness. Which might seem odd, since that was the backstory of the first game and this is the fourth one. The US manual and intro state that Simon is once again battling Dracula, implying it's a sequel to Castlevania 2, however, this was not the original intention of the Japanese developers. In actuality, Castlevania 4 was meant to be a remake of the original game. They wanted a back-to-basics game for the series' debut on the Super Nintendo, and I thought the best way to do that was by taking Simon Belmont's original adventure through Castlevania and doing it from scratch for the SNES and implementing all these new features and ideas. But it's also worth mentioning how the game doesn't feature any story elements while you play, it's just level-to-level action like the original. Therefore, there isn't a truly definitive canon version of Simon's fight with Dracula. In the newer Anniversary Collection, it comes with a timeline of events, for the games that were included in the set, and Castlevania 1 and Super Castlevania 4 are just interchangeable. It doesn't say one or the other is the true version of events, it's just whichever one you prefer because it's the same difference, story-wise. As stated, it was a good reason to go back to the pure basics of the original game for the new hardware. Even more stripped down than 3 was because this game doesn't have extra characters or branching pathways, it's one linear action game, while still implementing lessons learned from making the sequels. Similar to Castlevania 3, the game gets more level variety of how you don't start at Dracula's door like the first game, you have to play several levels while working your way there. Starting in this atmospheric outside area, where you can clearly see how much more detailed the world is in 16-bit compared to 8-bit, and the music sets the mood for the adventure. But then you get inside and this absolute banger drops. It's called the Theme of Simon Belmont and it plays for the whole intro stage, and it really sets you up to be playing an exciting action platformer. The music and visuals are absolutely excellent from top to bottom in this game. Every stage after this has some super catchy bop to accompany it too. And the visual variety is kept up as you explore caves, waterways, and other ancient structures before reaching the castle. One of my favorite things to see in early SNES era games is the designers flexing what cool things they could do on the new system, and this game is no different. You have giant bosses making good use of transparency effects, water rippling as you swing through it, backgrounds rotating around you, and foregrounds rotating around you for that matter. Super Castlevania 4 is a very visually detailed game for the standards of the SNES. And as I've said in the past, I really like to see that next generation appeal in old games. To get into the game proper, the manual already clued us into Simon's expanded handling, but let's go over it in more detail. In this game, Simon's much more mobile. When you jump, you can change the direction mid-air, which is obviously a game changer since your trajectory was locked in place in the previous games. So you have more room for error and platforming while playing Part 4. You can also jump down from stairs as well. But most of the expanded moveset is for combat. With the added buttons on the SNES controller, you can use sub-weapons with the R button instead of the button combo from the original games. More importantly, Simon can now aim his whip in 8 directions, but you just need to be jumping to whip down or in the downward diagonal directions. This comes in handy in multiple ways because you can aim diagonally for candles to whip, and it can hit enemies that are coming in from awkward angles that might have proven disastrous in the original trilogy. If you hold down the attack button, the whip goes limp and you can flail it around too. This serves as a shield against low damage projectiles and also can be used on enemies that are just barely out of range of the 8 directions. So Simon's combat potential is night and day compared to the original games. But I wanted to take this moment to say that while the combat has expanded a lot from the previous games, that doesn't mean anything was wrong with them. That's what I was saying in Castlevania 1. That game was clearly designed with its limitations in mind. The limited jump and attack range were the things the platforming and enemy designs were built off of. That goes for all 3 games, not just the first. 3 was certainly much more difficult, and 2 was a much different kind of game, but in all 3, I just felt like the limited controls in combat were a part of the experience. I like Simon's handling in 4 more than the original trilogy because I just think it's easier to control and get to grips with. However, I don't think it's fair to say 4 is fixing what was broken about 1 through 3, because I don't think it is. I think it expands upon what was already done, which sounds similar, but those are distinct things. With all these adjustments, I'm sure you're thinking,
wow, sounds easy.
Not really. Much like the NES games were built around their controls, Super Castlevania 4 also was.
Wow, sounds hard.
Yes, it presents an interesting tactical challenge.
I would say the difficulty of Super Castlevania 4 has scaled naturally alongside the increase in your moveset. I don't think it's ever as difficult as the third game, but I got my ass kicked by this game plenty. Not at the beginning, though. In the first 2 or 3 stages, I was kinda kicking the game's butt. But to be fair, it does start somewhat easy. The thing that tripped me up the most in the first couple of stages was that I sometimes couldn't tell what was set dressing and what was an obstacle. Like, the horse heads in the first level hit me and I didn't even see them coming. In the caves, I couldn't be sure if these raindrops were going to be lethal or if they were nothing. They were nothing, but all in all, the first couple stages were pretty easy. Though I got nervous with the enemies in level 2 that were bushes coming to life. You have to contend with those at the same time as these arms that come up from the ground to grab you. And I always also felt the urge to say my prayers every time you needed to swing on something. The mechanic is simple, you jump and whip the point to swing on it, but I was afraid it was going to be janky and kill me. It was intuitive enough, but still plenty of segments with it managed to grind my gears nevertheless. So much like Castlevania 1, I want to go through the levels and highlight the parts that stuck out to me and how I conquered them. Like I said, the first couple levels weren't super complicated. The first one even having a really simple boss fight to make you feel really comfortable. And then I spent most of my time in level 2 just admiring the visual detail like the water rushing down or the bridge reacting to Simon's steps. It was the third stage of level 3 where the game was like, okay, time to turn it on. It wasn't the hardest stage ever, but it did feature obstacles dropping from the sky and crumbling platforms and enemies jumping out of the water all at once. Water's an instant death like usual, so the game is like, get it right or fucking die, good luck. But who would complain with music this good in the background? Level 4 was also kind of a learning curve for me. I knew that the first stage revolved around the twisty platforms, but what tripped me up was the ones over pits where you have to jump on them and then needed to jump off with like split-second timing or else you'll fall into the abyss and die. The later stages of level 4 all bring in their A-game too with the special effects. Like this room where you need to hold onto this hook with the whip while the room spins around you. Figuring this part out was kind of a bitch at first because I thought you had to jump this way, but that's just death waiting to happen. You wait for the room to spin, and then it stops, and you fight enemies, and then it spins again, and you need to hold on for dear life while waiting for these platforms to appear so you can progress forward to the room where the background is spinning around you in very cool fashion. The final level of this area sees platforms rising all around you and you need to navigate your way up. It was probably the easiest part of level 4, but an interesting challenge nevertheless. I really like how the game is paced. Stage 4 is the hardest one thus far, but then Stage 5 feels like a breather. It doesn't beat itself or anything, but there's only 2 stages and no boss fight, and it's probably the simplest and easiest one yet. In truth, Stage 5 is more a breather, a transition between the opening levels and the part where you actually walk into the castle and things get far more sinister. Stage 6 begins with the hallway from hell.
Hallway is a pretty kind term for what looks to me like a complex medieval gauntlet of death.
And fun fact, when writing that section, I was torn between using that sentence to lead into a Sly reference or twist the lyrics of This Place Hotel into being Hallway from Hell, but I chose to make it Sly anyway. I know I already did one earlier, but fuck it. The opening stage sees enemies coming in from every which way. Dogs that can only be killed by crouching, bats that fly at an angle, candles that can only be hit diagonally, and one-hit ghouls flying at you like the opening stage of Castlevania 1. For this part, I just realized that if you just keep moving forward, you won't get too much trouble from any of it. But the cruelest prank the devs pulled was when you go up these stairs. The next section is jumping on these chandeliers, but I straight up walked off these stairs right off the ledge into the abyss. It's not like that's poorly designed, I just thought it was funny because I fell for it maybe 2 or 3 times in a row. The next section with these ghostly enemies and flying light things was also kicking my keister in too, because the spacing is really tight. To the point where the next section felt like a breeze by comparison, even with the skulls of Jeffrey the Giraffe watching over you as you pass through. The dancing ghost couple was just another Castlevania boss where my strategy was attacking and hoping I happened to win first. Never fails. Except the times where it does, but this wasn't one of them. By comparison, level 7 was quite the breath of fresh air. It's Dracula's library and it has flying books and things like that, but it's nowhere near as hard as the last level. Or at least I didn't think it was. I think Stage 6 was a madhouse, but 7 was far more predictable to deal with. Stage 8 is arranged in a simple way, but it gets the challenge and depth out of being a really do-or-die set piece. Spikes are everywhere, and just touching the sides of them is instant death, so I got killed quite a bit in level 8, but again, nothing about it's unreasonable or unfair. Especially since it's a stage with only 2 acts instead of 3 or 4. They're longer, but it doesn't feel like you lose a lot of progress if you get a game over. And level 9 is another one that seems simple, but here in Dracula's Treasury, there's always something that keeps you on the move, like exploding platforms over a pit, or bone enemies tossing bones, or bats flying around, or the ever-present tension of the souls of the damned flying past you on screen at all times. The whole thing ends with these bat enemies made of treasure. Probably not a hard boss, but I didn't have a sub-weapon, so it was hard to avoid taking damage since I needed to get kinda close to use my whip. The composers then decided to really bring out the nostalgia for the final 3 stages. First, you play the clock tower and get this sick remix of Bloody Tears from Castlevania 2. And then you get another remix of Vampire Killer from Castlevania 1, and finally Beginning from Castlevania 3, all back to back to back, and they sound pretty stellar. You're gonna need that hit of nostalgia to carry you through the gauntlet of bosses you need to fight before Dracula. Like this dude, my strategy was just whipping him, walking away, ducking and whipping and repeating and hoping he didn't do the close-range snout attack. Or this two-phased demon guy. He wasn't so bad at least, I just tried to outlast him. And then death comes at the end. I learned on the internet to just stand in the corner, whip up when he's above, duck when he throws the thing, and use the flail to destroy projectiles. And after that, you finally make it to Dracula. Before you start, know there's a super cool secret here where you can get 99 hearts, both whip upgrades, upgraded ammo, and the Holy Cross all in one. But it then took me an embarrassing amount of time to figure out how to jump back up from here. There's a secret invisible set of stairs right next to it. But luckily, this is a permanent checkpoint, so I had plenty of time to figure that out. Thankfully, Dracula only has one health bar, but it's still pretty tough. But just spam toss crosses where his head will be and hope it hits him while you destroy his projectiles before they can hit you. The crosses can also take care of the fire heads during that phase as well. In the third section of the fight, he may even drop health for you, which was super useful. As the final phase feels more like a victory lap because the music stops and the theme of Simon Belmont kicks in right as you deliver the final blows, which was really awesome to experience. Thus ending Super Castlevania 4. The game ends similarly to the original with the castle sinking into the ground, only now we see Simon watching it from a cliffside before the credits. Not much else I can really add in this game. I was promised a sick game, and what I got was a sick game. Super Castlevania 4 is the best game the series had produced up to this point. To reiterate, not because there was something wrong with the previous ones, but because it took advantage of the new hardware to make something really stellar. It's a phenomenal SNES platformer. SNES games have always resonated with me much more than NES ones. They just feel more evolved because there were more standards in place for making a great game by the time of the early 90s compared to the mid-80s. So I think the game is worthy of all its praise, if you ask me. Not that anyone needed me to tell them that or give them permission to think that, I'm just preaching to the choir because I loved the experience just as much as everyone said I would. Even if some sections really kicked my butt into next Tuesday. But I'm very glad I finally got to play this game and give it a video. And again, I'm very glad and grateful people really dig these Castlevania vids, because now we get to see if it remains my favorite Classicvania game, because next up is going to be my video on Castlevania Bloodlines. Don't really have any expectations for this game, so I'm curious to see what it's all about, which will be ready next week. Until that time comes, I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.